Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of our Frumo podcast. And today I have for you Roelof van Zwol, who is Head of Ads Quality at Pinterest. Welcome, Roelof, and thank you for joining.
Hi, Koen. Thank you for the introduction. It's really nice to see you again.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Roelof, so you're Head of Ads Quality at Pinterest. Advertising at Pinterest. Can you explain a little bit to us what that means for the advertiser? Is it a product, an advertising product similar to that of Facebook and Google that many people know? Can you compare it a little bit and enlighten us as an introduction?
Yeah, let's try to put it a little bit in perspective. So, um, hopefully, many of you have heard about Pinterest before. Traditionally, Pinterest was a place where users come and collect a lot of the ideas that they find on the internet, and then bring it together in boards on Pinterest. More recently, that is changing a little bit, and people are using Pinterest for many different reasons. But from a very high perspective, people come to Pinterest for inspiration. They have inspiration, they're looking for new inspiration, or they have ideas and they're collecting ideas, and they're using Pinterest to manage those ideas. That actually creates a really interesting opportunity for advertisers to reach users very early on in their journey as it comes to potentially buying products. And so, from that perspective, the offering that Pinterest provides to advertisers is very different from what they get at Google, where you go and do a search and you expect last click attribution, you search and you expect an ad to be on the top of the page. Or when you're on Facebook, where you go to Facebook or other social media for social interactions, and the ad might not really be aligned with what you're doing at that point. Or a company like Amazon, where it's all about e-commerce and you're ready to buy, right? So Pinterest provides you a different kind of perspective where very early on in the user journey, there's an opportunity to reach users and inform them about the products that you have. A different way to think about this now from a user perspective is that Pinterest, when users come to Pinterest, they come for inspiration, and we would like them to go away with action, right? Once you've found the inspiration, ads quality team and the ads marketplace team really wants to drive action for users, helping them to fulfill their dreams.
Right. Let me check whether one of my personal examples, let's say, is valid as a prototype for many Pinterest users. So I'm doing some refurbishments in my home, and I'm doing it together with an architect. And then the architect wants to know, like, yeah, but what's your taste? What do you like? And so we put together a Pinterest board with pictures of interiors that we like, and that, let's say, communicate the feeling that we also want to have in our home. Would that be, let's say, an average use case on Pinterest, or am I the odd one out?
No, I think that's a really good example of how users come to Pinterest. They come for many different reasons, but home decor and how you actually furnish your house is one of the things that requires a lot of thought and inspiration. Um, People also come for food and recipes. They come for pictures of tattoos. They come for many different things that they want to decide upon, and they want to collect information. But home decor and redecoration is a really good example.
Right. So when we talk about advertising in a content context, the general trade-off that let's say, also many publishers and entertainment companies struggle with is the trade-off between, well, serving content to their users on the one hand, but on the other hand, let's say, replacing certain positions with content with advertisements, of course, and like how much advertisement can you put there, and what are the criteria they have to fulfill? How do you deal with that at Pinterest?
So, um, wow, this is like a 2 hour story. I don't know if you've got the time for this, but the first starting from this from a user perspective, right? We've probably all seen ads that do not align with what we're thinking about at that point in time. And so the key challenge is, how do you make sure that the ads that you show to a user are aligned with their interests? Um, Pinterest is trying to build a performance-based ads business, which means we're not just showing ads because of impressions, but we are trying to drive action from users to an advertiser's website. Uh, Advertisers can then pay for a user clicking on their ad, or a user converting and actually buying a product on our ad. And if you intend to build a performance-based advertising product, you can see it's really about the matchmaking between the user and the advertiser. And the impression that we show on Pinterest is the medium to do that. You can imagine that in the advertiser business, you often talk about supply and demand. Supply is the available impression opportunities that we have on our platform to show an ad to a user. And demand is the number of ads and the budget that we have in the system where we are asked to serve ads to a user. And so this is a matchmaking problem where the better you understand the need of the user in the context of the user on what they're doing at that point on Pinterest, the better you will actually provide value for users as well as advertisers. And so by and large, our role is to really find that match, use machine learning to understand the needs of the user and make sure that it aligns with the intent of the advertiser and the products that they're offering. While at the same time also making sure that you guardrail, because you can go too far with the number of ads, or that you understand when is the right time to serve an ad. Recent advancements in machine learning really help us to focus on understanding the user journey more specifically, not just thinking about the kind of things that you've seen from in the past, but taking, for instance, more recent activity of the user into account when giving recommendations.
Okay. I understand that it is possible, let's say, to find an optimum. A challenge that I see, and I'm very curious how you deal with that, is long-term versus short-term goals. Because I can imagine that when you engineer such a system, that well, the more ads that you show to a user, and let's say you go too far, you show too many ads, well, on your, let's say, the products that you sold or the conversions that you achieved, they will go up just because the sheer number of if you show it to more people, there will at least be a few that convert. So those numbers will go up. On the other hand, let's say the downside of what you're doing, the damage that you're causing if you're going too far, would be only visible probably on a much larger time scale at a later date, because people will probably feel a less qualitative product. They will feel it's less relevant, and they might start to use Pinterest less and less. But as I see it, that's something that does not happen from one day to the other. It's more of a gradual thing. Is that a, let's say, a correct view on things, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that is definitely a challenge in the context of advertising. So far I've spoken about advertisers and users. There is a third party, a third stakeholder in that marketplace, which obviously is Pinterest themselves. And maybe it's good to start with a mission statement for ads quality. Our goal is to provide long-term value, first and foremost for pinners and partners, because if they are satisfied with our service, they will come back and spend more money with Pinterest, right? So we are not looking to optimize for short-term revenue, but we're looking to optimize for long-term revenue, which is expressed or conditioned on the satisfaction of a user coming back to Pinterest in the future, as well as advertisers continuing to spend or spending more money with Pinterest, because that's how you grow the business. And that technically needs to come together in the marketplace that you're designing, where the goal still would be to optimize for revenue, subject to meeting a certain bar for user satisfaction, where the quality of the ads that you show is good. Typically, this is measured in terms of relevance, in terms of engagement, because those are short-term observations that we can make in the system that we know correlate with long-term satisfaction of the user and long-term behavior of the user. And similarly, from an advertiser perspective, if they get value because they're spending money with Pinterest, and so they want to see incremental conversions, incremental traffic going to their website, if they see that incremental value coming from them spending with Pinterest, they can decide to spend more money with Pinterest.
Okay. Do you, in this whole story, let's say the goal of a brand that advertises with Pinterest is to just create traffic to their website or whatever thing they wanna get attention to. Do you run into a problem that is very similar to clickbait, in the sense that what you sometimes see is that, yeah, people sometimes click on ads because it's just, yeah, it tickles their interest. It's just like, oh, this looks funky, and then they click it, but then afterwards they bounce back again from where they got pretty quickly because, oh yeah, it was funky, but what comes after is a little bit disappointed. So in my experience, yeah, you can create, sometimes you can, if you use the click as the signal, you can the machine learning can learn the wrong thing sometimes. Is that an issue that you're running into?
So I think it's a natural behavior of any party that is doing any interaction on the internet that they're trying to maximize the value that they get for their own benefit. And so sometimes they might have objectives and they will learn that clickbait or showing ads that might not be truthful might be helping them to drive more traffic. The question if it's really helping their business. There's a number of protections. The first protection is that of ads integrity and policy enforcement. There's simply regulations about what kind of ads we can show and what are the conditions under which advertisers can actually advertise on Pinterest, with the intent of being compliant with legal regulations, as well as making sure that we're protecting the users, trust and safety from a user perspective, right? So that's the first line of defense when it comes to this. And so you want to make sure that you don't have bad actors either from a user or from an advertiser perspective on your platform. So trust and safety is a big deal. The second part, it could still be that they're trying to drive more engagement through particular creative that might be misleading, which could be very innocent, from click here to learn more, to using creative that is not depicting the product that they're selling. There are a number of ways that we're looking at this. So obviously, as an advertiser, there's 3 types of products that you can choose when you're setting up a campaign. The first type is that of brand awareness, where essentially you're just paying for the impression. You put in a budget, you say this is the amount of money that I want to spend, and then you're paying for the impressions that are being delivered on Pinterest. The second type is that of traffic, where as an advertiser, you end up paying for clicks that are being generated to your website. And finally, you can have a conversion objective, where you're then setting up a campaign and you essentially aim to maximize the number of conversions. There's 2 types of bids related to it, because there's a new component in the marketplace that is very specific for ads domain, which you don't necessarily see in a lot of other applications of machine learning, which is the bid component. And so you can choose to have a manual bid or an automated bid. And the goal would be to either drive awareness, impressions, clicks, or conversions, but it could be that you always pay per impression or that you pay for the action itself. And so when setting up a campaign, these are kind of choices that an advertiser makes. From a defensive perspective, we're not just looking for clicks, right? So if you as an advertiser pay for clicks, then we want to have certain guardrails from a user perspective in mind that do not strongly correlate with the action that the advertiser is paying for. For instance, we are looking into how relevant is an ad in the context of a user. For instance, if you, Koen, are doing a search for a new couch because you're looking to renovate or to improve your living room, then we probably don't want to show an ad about mortgages, even though you might still be in the business of doing a refinance of your house, right? So there could be multiple things that we're doing. But at that point, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the ad that we show is relevant in context of your need, in context of the actions that you're taking at that point in time. The advertiser might pay for the click, but we put in additional guardrails that are focused on how relevant is this particular ad at this point in time to what you, Koen, are doing on Pinterest right now. There's also other means. For instance, if we show you an ad and you click on it because it's clickbait, a very typical behavior is that immediately after clicking on it, you will go back to the main site, or you might even abandon Pinterest altogether because you're dissatisfied with the content that's being offered. And so from that perspective, you can think about good clicks. How much time or how long does the user actually spend on the landing page of the advertiser? You can think about pre versus post-click relevance models. Pre is like the assessment of relevance when you're going there. Post is like an assessment of the quality of the page. If the page that I'm landing on is full of ads, right, and not really trying to sell me a product, then that could be misleading. As a result, your post-click relevance score will be very low, and that is a signal that we can use in the auction to determine whether or not this is the right ad to be shown for you.
The post-click relevance score, is that something that you compute automatically? Can you, or how do I?
So think of as part of the market, so the entire marketplace team or the ads delivery funnel consists of a number of stages. Typically, when you have a request to serve an ad, right, a user comes to Pinterest, they do a search. At that point, we have an opportunity to serve an ad. We are going to fetch candidates that we can show. You should imagine that we have millions of ads in our systems, hundreds of millions of ads in the system that we need to fetch. And everything needs to happen online, right? So there's no pre-computing, everything needs to be computed on the fly. And so we typically go through a number of stages in the ads delivery funnel, where first we need, out of hundreds of millions of ads, we need to fetch tens of thousands of candidates that are related to the action that the user is doing. In a second stage, we need to come up with high quality, highly accurate predictions of how that particular ad relates to the user context in terms of click prediction, in terms of the likelihood of the user to hide or save a pin, with respect to how likely the user is to purchase a product, or how likely or how relevant an ad is in the context of that query. And so these are high quality, highly accurate predictions that we need to make before we're going into the final stage of the ads delivery funnel, which is the auction itself. Typically in the auction, we have, let's say, in the order of 1,000 candidates left that we need to now do with a more precise ranking and determine which ad is going to win the auction itself. At that part, we have a so-called partner bid, which is the action, the probability of the action that they're paying for times how much they're willing to pay for, plus some quality components that say how relevant is this ad to the user. And so when you think of this, it's not a single model that makes a prediction of which ad we do want to show to the user. It's typically in the order of 10, 20 different predictions that jointly determine the final ranking of all the ad candidates that enter the auction, and then determine which ad will win the auction itself. Just to give you an idea of this, we will typically have millions of auctions every minute that need to be run in parallel, and we will have thousands of candidates entering the auction. So all of this needs to be real time, and the entire ads delivery funnel typically needs to be within like a couple of 100 milliseconds.
Yeah, that's really fast. So do I understand correctly that you do this filtering in stages? So if there is an ad with a very high bid from the advertiser, but in the second stage, it's already filtered out, or in the first one, because it's not relevant to my context, then it's not in the auction. And then in the auction, let's say an ad with a higher bid can lose from one with a slightly lower bid, because the relevance of the, let's say, of the ad you earn less money on is so much higher for me.
Yeah. So there's so the that's exactly how it works, and the real question is, how do you design such a funnel where you make sure that all the different stages in that funnel, right, from the moment to first selecting candidates to getting an initial ranking to getting highly accurate predictions to running the auction to actually finally inserting the ad in the page and where in the page to insert, all those predictions need to be aligned, and you need to make sure that you're making the right decisions at the right time. For instance, if I would select my initial candidates based on bid, indeed they are likely to not be very relevant. That leads to poor user quality. If my initial stage is only based on relevance, they might not be engaging, or they might be very low bids, which is not the right balance either, because then you're not really monetizing the system. And so the real challenge is to do that. An ideal auction, by the way, doesn't have a quality bid, but is just focused on a partner bid, because that is the cleanest auction that you can have. But it really depends on what are the kind of candidates that are entering the auction, on how much influence you want to exercise. And then ultimately, of course, you need to align this not with immediately the payoff that you have from that auction itself, but over many auctions and many visits from users, because the long-term value is what you want to really optimize for.
In your advertising product, can advertisers target themselves in a certain way, or is it purely like they have an ad, they have a budget, and Pinterest says, well, guys, we'll determine relevant, hey, we'll determine instead of you, we'll figure out to whom this is relevant? Or does the advertiser have some, let's say, some buttons to turn and to decide like who to target?
Yeah. So far we've spoken mostly on the we focused mostly on the ads delivery part of it. The other part is a part where we really try to help advertisers be successful by giving them all kinds of recommendations. So you can imagine that if I'm a new advertiser or an existing advertiser and I want to spend money with Pinterest, before even spending one single dollar, I want to know how much value am I going to get for it. And so we have models that tries to predict how much value in terms of impressions, conversions, or clicks an advertiser will get when they spend an X amount of dollars with Pinterest. That is used by sales teams or in self-service mode for advertisers to say, okay, hey, this is an opportunity for me to really engage it. Once they then said, okay, I'm going to spend money with Pinterest, they need to set up a campaign. One part of that campaign, besides setting a bid or choosing the product that you want to use, the ad product that you want to use, one part of that is always to determine the target audience. And there's different ways that you can actually define a target audience for your ads and for your products. One way is you need to create an ad, and you need to define keywords for the ad that you're using to promote on Pinterest. So you define keywords. You can define interests. You can say, I want to target a particular demographics. I want to target a female audience of a certain age in a certain region. And so these are demographic-based targeting criteria that you can specify. You can then further enrich this with audiences, because you as an advertiser know best who's buying your product. And so one of the industry practices is that you then help define the audience through tools that will help and say, like, these are the prototypical users that I'm trying to reach, which is information that really helps build that connection between the audience that we have on Pinterest and the buyers of a particular product from the advertiser website. And so you can imagine that there's like different kind of products that we're using to really help target. Our role is to make it as easy as possible for advertisers to be successful on Pinterest. which means please tell us what you know about your audience because you know your product the best. But we know who the users are on Pinterest, and so we'll try to help and find the best possible audiences and potentially even new pockets that you didn't have that are actually driving incremental value for your business. And so that is a big chunk of what we're also responsible for, which is all kinds of models that help predict who the right audience for your product is based on the information that you're giving us. Then there's one more step to it. Once you've got your campaign running, you also can use machine learning to say, okay, what happens if I change my bid? What happens if I change my budget? What happens if I change the target audience? And so these kind of recommendations that we can provide to advertisers will help them be even more successful because they can then fine tune the campaigns that they have.
Wow, so that's really a lot of things coming together. Um, you have advertisers defining their audience. Then you have all the usage data also telling you a lot in terms of whether they were right with their audience or not. You have the bits, you want to keep it relevant. You have to bring all that together. And then you have another feedback loop where you're making recommendations to advertisers on how to adjust, well, say, all the settings that they have. That's a lot of complexity.
It's,
How do you keep everything running and still sleep at night?
um, Sleep at night. I don't know about that part. No, it is. I think the key part is to really try to build teams that scale and bringing the team together. And so the team that I'm leading is very specialist on machine learning and algorithmic design and economists. But we're building this together with our partner teams. For instance, a team that's really responsible for the front end. And so the key challenge is to really make sure that you're aligned on what you're building, to have a lot of monitoring in place, so that on a daily basis you know exactly what's happening. Obviously, you will have incidents because we're trying to innovate as fast as we can, create new experiences, create better models, and every time you innovate, there's a chance of something breaking. If something breaks, then that's not good, obviously, right? Because if something breaks, that's when I get the midnight phone call saying like, hey, there's an incident, why is this happening? And then the CEO also doesn't look so happy, and the CFO also says like, hey, this is costing us money. But that's part of doing business. You need to innovate and really need to make sure that the models become better. And so from that perspective, you do a lot of experimentation, you do a lot of unit testing, you do a lot of making sure that your system is not being compromised, but you should accept that things fail. And then the key challenge is to have the monitoring in place to fail fast, right? Because if you fail fast, you recover and you do damage control and you learn from that, because next time you shouldn't make the same mistake. So that is one of the things that as a team it's really important, not just to try to launch new products, but to do it responsibly in a way that allows the business to scale, so that you actually can drive more value for both pinners and partners. Another thing that I think is important is like, how do you scale as an organization? And that is typically with the complexity that you have. And this is a balance that you will see nearly on a daily basis playing out in all our discussions. How much do you want to invest in a new product versus making an existing product better? And you can say, well, you should always do new products because that will give you step function changes in the value that you create. And while that is very true, it also means that you as an organization need to be able to scale, because if you introduce new systems, typically the complexity of your system as a whole will go up and you will have a larger tech debt. And so the key challenge, and this is some of the big things that we've invested in, is how do we actually reduce complexity so that we better scale as an organization? Because you don't want to scale with the number of advertisers or the number of users. You want to scale with the complexity of the product offering that you provide, because that's how you build really scalable systems.
Okay. So if you look at the amount of people at Pinterest working on this whole advertising system in order of magnitude, how many people are we talking about?
I think we're really small compared to the giants like Google or Facebook or Amazon. Um, machine learned talent is still very hard to come by, and even though technology has become more mainstream, knowing how to use that technology is still a specialty, and it requires a lot of skilled people with a background in statistics, with a background in computer science and modeling. And so the machine learning team is still very small in terms of around 100 people that are really focused and experts on the modeling. But as a bigger organization, because we're only building a one small part of the system, right, the modeling part, you need a much larger organization to really help that scale. You scale with the complexity of the organization. We probably have around, just in the ads delivery part, we probably have around 80, 90 models today. We actually had many more before. And ideally, you want to have two engineers, two ML engineers working on a single model so that you have some form of redundancy so that they work together. Because if you have the opposite, right, one ML engineer working on 3 or 4 models, it means that they don't get enough attention. It's likely to degrade. You're not able to make enough iteration. And so the number of engineers that you have working on your model really depends also on your entire machine learning environment. How mature is the environment? How easy is it to deploy and develop new models, to maintain models, to actually have the monitoring in place? And so big investment need to be made in the entire environment that you're building, not just the model itself.
Can you explain a little bit why, let's say, a model continuously needs, yeah, at least one person, but preferably two people, let's say, maintaining it? Because I often get the question, well, you build a model, it trains, it works. There is a cycle to, let's say, to do repeat training, so it updates itself, everything's running automatically. Why do you need like one or two
So
full-time equivalents? What do they have to do?
I consider myself a hacker, and I definitely know how to build a model in a nice Jupyter notebook, right? Um, and then I can go to my engineer and say, look, it's working. Why are you not doing more? And that's not a very realistic a picture of the world, because there's so much more coming together in making a model really being deployed in production. There's very simple things. You're not the only one working on the system, and continuously things change in the system itself. You're continuously innovating, and when you change something, you're touching it that could have impact on an existing model that you're not necessarily touching directly. Second is user behavior can change. The product needs can change. If user behavior changes, the underlying data and features are changing as well. You can solve that by continuously retraining your model, but that only stays true for a certain amount of time. And then you want to drive incremental performance of your models by getting better features, by adopting new models that you have. Very often, and I call this cascading of models, the output of one model becomes the input of the next model, right? And when you have these dependencies, when one model changes, it could have changes on the other model. So you continuously need to update not just a single model, but the entire chain of models that together create the user experience. Calibration is extremely important in an auction. So in a lot of the machine learning applications, you want to say, hey, the user is more interested in item A than item B. In a marketplace, it's not that they're more interested in item A and B. It is also about what is the difference in the prediction in a click. Because the difference in the prediction of a click is what actually determines how much an advertiser needs to pay extra if you're the advertiser for item B to actually win the auction. Right? So things like calibration are additional factors. Calibration can shift and drift due to change in user behavior. And therefore you need to then continuously monitor and improve that system. Yes, in the ideal world, the model is fully self-sufficient. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the ideal world yet.
Yeah, definitely not. Thanks for bringing these arguments. I'll be able to use them in the future. Um, So Roelof, thanks a lot. We are almost at the end of this podcast. I have one question for you that I ask everybody. So you are now very experienced in this field. You have already done quite some things in advertising, but also in machine learning in general. Um, if you look back on what you have learned and you would need to give advice to either your younger self or maybe people, let's say, only starting in machine learning or companies starting with machine learning, is there some important learning that you can give them as a takeaway?
Yeah, the I don't want to sound like the old guy, but definitely one of the things that is very noticeable is how technology has advanced, how machinery has advanced to a point where only 5, 6 years ago, training particular types of models that would take into account user sequence, right? The sequence of user actions was near impossible to do at scale. Whereas today, this is really easy to do at scale. And so technology has become more mainstream. Machinery has become more mainstream. And so the investments are slightly different because you still need to know how to use that technology, thinking about the design of the models, maybe more so than the model itself, right? Because you can plug and play different models, but you need to be very much aware about how do you make particular design choices for which model to use, and how do you design the data that is used to train your models, which becomes more and more important. Um, from a career perspective, and I think this is true probably for many domains. I think it's important to be curious, to stay curious, because computer science is a very young domain. Um, and I think what you see is if you try many different things, you will be able to reuse ideas and learnings that you have from different domains in new applications, and that will make yourself stronger and broader, and will help you be successful in many different applications.
Thanks a lot for that great advice, and also, of course, for the great talk, Roelof. It was really my pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Yeah, likewise, it was a lot of fun.
And for all our viewers and listeners, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated with our next talks. Thanks a lot, and see you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.